Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Deminar. Looking forward to sharing what we continue to build here. A couple new features I'll be showing off today, but let me start by sharing at a high level what we're doing here at Jaxon is addressing the so-called hallucination problem. So these LLMs that everyone's using are the ultimate people pleasers and rotten liars. They'll just tell you something that sounds plausible and it might be completely fabricated. Of course, many times it gets it right, but for the long tail of questions that it gets wrong that are mission critical, they're really a big downside for it getting it wrong is where Jaxon comes in. We are the verification layer after the LLMs. We determine if it is or isn't in compliance with a known set of rules that we extract using LLMs from existing policy documents, whether internal or external, and apply those rules in a programmatic way. So we take everything away from natural language, we bring it into code, we write programs, and then we solve for them. Solving meaning it is looking at all the different combinations of possible right answers and determining whether or not a rule, again, a rule that we've extracted from existing policies, is or isn't satisfied. And then we spit out and I'll show in a quick demo here in the not too distant future, a report of all the flags, any rules that were tripped, and has an audit trail associated with it so that you can see what was tripped, how it was tripped, and any details around perhaps who imparted the rule, where did the rule come from, etc. All right, our big differentiator is that we are bringing in neurosymbolic techniques, tried and true neurosymbolic techniques that have been around for a while. Symbolic reasoning has been around for decades. It's really how machine learning started. It either did or didn't follow a rule. LLMs are super powerful and a great addition. We're just bringing back the old ways of making sure that they're doing things that we can trust. We recommend the RAG technique. That's the solution on the market today, the open source varieties and commercial off the shelf that bring in representative data to the mix so that the LLMs that were trained on the world's data have more of a clue as to the domain specific use case, but it's still probabilistic and it still has the hallucination issue in the mix and is still an issue for use cases that require the rigor of symbolic reasoning. So we recommend doing that, increase the probability of giving us an accurate answer, but we are going to be that final say of whether or not it does or doesn't comply. We do have a number of agentic rails in the mix. Agentic meaning we are using LLMs for this, and this is in collaboration with the symbolic reasoning piece, but these are techniques that we've created that don't just use an LLM as a judge. It uses the LLMs in various ways for perturbing the question and making sure that it still gives the answer. We're looking for consensus across multiple LLMs, and we're changing the dynamics of the content, but still keeping the context and determining whether or not it is still something that conforms and everyone agrees with, everyone being the models. Nice benchmarks on our approach here. These are the agentic rails beating the current state-of-the-art models by a good number of percentage points here. Again, increasing the probability that the answer is going to be right. And then we bring it into our policy-based verification process. So we call these our policy rules, guardrails. Guardrails in the context of evaluating the outputs of LLMs. And again, using rules that have been captured from, extracted from, and codified by Jaxon. And then we run it through our desale process. Desale is technology we've created with lots of inspiration and collaboration from DoD for applications that require this high rigor. It stands for domain-specific AI language. And it is what is turning everything into code and making this a programmatic determination versus a probabilistic based. So determinism is in our blood now, and trying to get it as far to the right of deterministic as we possibly can. All right, I'm going to skip over to the demo now. So you land on the platform. We have all the documentation that you need. We have lots of tutorials, a great support desk. We have a benchmarking environment that you can do right in the platform. You can see the before and after right here and determine the lift and the accuracy that Jaxon brings based off of your use cases. And then the platform, which is where I'm going to go. So in the platform, you create applications. Multiple guardrails can be applied to one application. You can also mix and match existing guardrails for a new application. I'm going to go into the guardrail section now. The demo I'm going to show today is a demo I've shown before, but I'm going to get into a little bit more of the details and some of the bells and whistles here. So this is compliance with a FINRA regulation. Bring up the actual regulation. You'll see it's a policy that was written by humans for human interpretation, never meant for a machine to take this. So there's still a lot of ambiguity in how this is written. And this itself is a reflection of the Securities Act of 1933, which is law. So it's an interpretation of the law. And actually that interpretation changes. So you'll see these FINRA regulations changing on a regular basis, which is a big value to bringing AI into the mix. So we can quickly incorporate those changes, have a verification process to make sure we're incorporating it properly, but big lift by leaning on the LLMs to do this piece. All right, let me go back in here. So we have the whole policy we've ingested. We're using whatever LLMs we care to use. There's over 60 that we currently support. We're using this O4 Mini right now as the mainline LLM, and we have OpenAI's O3 as the utility LLM. The utility LLM being the LLM we're going to use in between each of our processes in this workflow that I'm about to show. And the mainline LLM is what's going to be the main LLM we go to with something to be reviewed. And in the demo, I'm going to show emails being reviewed to determine whether or not they are compliant with all the rules we're imposing. All right, we take the policy, we use that utility LLM to turn it into a bulleted set of rules, still in natural language, editable if it doesn't reflect it properly. Usually this step is done fairly accurately where there doesn't require much, if any, human intervention. But once that is checked off on, we click this button, or whoever the user is clicks this button, and it generates our DSAL, our domain-specific AI language. And that's what this is down here. You'll see it's a bunch of Booleans and assertions, but it's code that we can use in our process that I was discussing earlier, where we're running it through solvers to deterministically prove or disprove compliance. All right, before we get there, we turn this code back into natural language, this time in the form of questions that you can imagine a human would ask of the data, or in their head they would process what they're looking for as it relates to a given rule. So we are taking that in here so that a subject matter expert can come in and not only confirm that the question is right, but importantly, add any additional context, especially for questions that don't have a Boolean type answer. All right, once all these questions are set, and there are a number of questions here, so there's a bit of time for the SMEs to come in and confirm that these all reflect the policy and have the context that is their wisdom, their institutional knowledge, I like to call it, wrapped up in their heads and extracted and put here for reuse across the organization, and will stay with the organization if that analyst were to leave. All right, again, all these are set, they're ready to go. They get wrapped up into a prompt, one big massive prompt with all these questions. And now it's going to go back to that mainline LLM with something to be reviewed. It's going to skip over here. This is an agent we created. You can have your existing agents you've already created and call on Jaxon through an API, and that's what we're doing here. I did this right before the call. I just didn't have to wait for the processing. It's not a lot of processing. It's like 3 seconds, but still. So I took in an email, and it ran up against all those rules, and it flags any of the rules that were tripped. If you look down here, we've got a bunch of failures. You can click into these failures. You get that whole audit report. You can see which rule was tripped, what within the email tripped it, and then triage it from there. Triage is not something we're trying to reinvent. You have a case management system, a ticketing system. We'll integrate with that. Our big lift is being able to determine compliance using the latest and greatest LLMs, using our approach to verify that the LLMs aren't hallucinating, that they are on point, and doing it in a way that is a lot more accurate. You have a lot less false positives, a lot less false negatives. It is not a big lift to make changes. It's a much better approach. I know you can't really see it because of the background, but I got on my whiteboard all the benefits to using LLMs in general. I'll just read it off to you. It can reason through edge cases. So before, when you create a bunch of lexicographical or regular expressions that a human had to sit down and think through what the right words were, what the right keywords, right key phrases were. This is a lot more flexible around those edge cases. It can ask users smart questions for additional guidance. It's not just a set piece of software. It is actually AI powered, so you can impact your workflow or impact how it processes data just by asking smart questions. It improves with every transaction. So the feedback becomes fuel. And then lastly, instead of freezing when something unexpected happens, the agents learn and can resolve it or pull in a human into the loop and get it resolved. All right, a lot of benefits to LLMs. That's why they're all the rage these days, because they are that powerful. They can reduce the workload on the humans. As I understand it, in financial service companies, the compliance piece takes a lot of time just to weed through those false positives and false negatives. This drastically reduces that burden and brings humans into the loop in such a way that we can learn from them and improve over time. All right, off my soapbox on that, done with the demo. Let me see if there are any questions. All right, we have a question here about deployment. I'm showing this to you through IBM Cloud. We're IBM Silver Partners. We can work with any of the LLMs within the IBM Watson environment. I showed during this demo we're using OpenAI, so we have the API keys to use OpenAI as well. Any cloud really can work, or on-prem. I think I hinted earlier, we do a lot of work with DoD. Everything there is in air-gapped environments, so we can work pretty much anywhere. All right, next question. What kind of overhead does it bring? I think I mentioned earlier, to process this email took a few seconds. In general, as the salesperson here, I like to say it's a couple seconds. The engineer in me always wants to say it depends, and the engineering team here at Jaxon always says it depends. Depends on how many rules are being checked, depends on how long the information being reviewed or the data being reviewed is, and the complexity of it. It might add a few more seconds than a couple, but that overhead is better than the downside of getting this wrong. So it adds a little bit of overhead, but the latency is really quite palatable. All right, any other questions? Let me see here. All right, one. Close to being deterministic as possible. That's the big value add that Jaxon brings to the equation. All right, last question. I've got lunch waiting for me. Can one guardrail check multiple regulations? So when you create a guardrail, you can create it with multiple regulations in mind, but best practices, and let me go back to the platform, each regulation, and then bring them together into one application. And that makes management of these guardrails much easier. As regulations change, it's very clear which guardrail is going to be impacted, and is a cleaner way of going about combining multiple regulations into one application. All right, that's all we have for today. I'm going to wrap up. Please reach out with any more questions, or if you'd like to see a demo or have a conversation as to how we can fit into your workflows. Thank you all.